Hello, and welcome to Follow Your Curiosity, where we explore the ups and downs of the creative process and how to keep it moving. I'm your host, Nancy Norbeck. I am a writer, singer, improv comedy newbie, science fiction geek, and creativity coach who loves helping right-brained folks get unstuck. I am so excited to be coming to you with interviews and coaching calls to show you the depth and breadth both of creative pursuits and creative people, to give you some insight into their experiences and to inspire you. Earlier this year, I interviewed Robert Smith. He's the mathematician who models zombie outbreaks as well as actual diseases, and has also written extensively on the subject of our mutual favorite show, Doctor Who. Robert was kind enough to put me in touch with his co-author, Anthony Wilson, who's my guest today. Anthony studied music composition, became a primary school teacher, and has written a variety of choral music, including a requiem. And, of course, he writes about Doctor Who. We had a wide-ranging discussion covering everything from the importance of choosing the people you share your work with carefully, especially in the early stages, what we can learn from how kids respond to the things they're curious about, the importance of structure, and how sometimes the best things in life come to us purely by accident. Here's our conversation. Anthony Wilson, I am really excited to talk to you today because you have exactly the kind of fascinatingly varied background that I find really, really interesting. And so I know you teach, you do all sorts of musical things. You also are Robert Smith's partner in writing crime. People should remember Robert. We talked to him a while ago, and actually, I was just thinking a minute ago, given our time zone near snafu, that I think we should leave the mathematics to him.
That's definitely a preference. Yeah.
So I don't know if there's a particular place that makes sense to you to start, or if it would be easier just to kind of give us an overview of how you've ended up doing the things that you're doing, or.
Okay, I suppose that's, well, the overview of how I've ended up doing the things I'm doing is pretty much completely by accident.
That's a great overview. Tell us more.
Everything I've ended up doing, practically everything I've ended up doing, I haven't intended to do. The only thing I probably intended to do was write music, which was when I was in my sort of mid-teens. That was definitely what I was going to do, next Mozart or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I am not the next Mozart. I know this to be true. I'm not the next anything to a large extent, but that was what I wanted to do. The writing has come about accidentally. The teaching came about accidentally. Running shows, musical theatre with children and adults has all come about sort of accidentally. I've just been in a particular place and someone said, "Oh, would you mind doing this?" I'll give it a go. Yeah, why not? So pretty much nothing has been planned. Nothing has been masterminded. And the only thing that was, well, I like the music I've written. Well, it is what it is.
So are there, with all of that accidental kind of stuff, which frankly, you have a pretty impressive list of accidental things. I wouldn't mind having a few more of those in my life. Is there any that stands out to you as a particularly unusual sequence of events, or something that surprised you in terms of how well it went or how much you have enjoyed it?
The writing with Robert particularly was both surprising and incredibly enjoyable. I've been thinking about this all day and thinking about sort of different questions and different ways you might think about things. I learned music. I studied music. Mm-hmm. And with sort of specific intent to compose and so forth. I never learned writing. That was never planned, never what I was going to do. I didn't even do sort of English A-levels. I don't know what the equivalent is in America, but I did my English GCSE and that was the end of it. And then it's all down to Doctor Who. Lots of these things end up being down to Doctor Who.
It could be down to worse things.
It could be down to worse things, yeah. I was reading a series of books and I found an online guide, and there was a mistake on the online guide. And then the online guide said, "If you find any errors, drop us an email." So I dropped Robert an email and said, "I think this is an error." And he said, "Oh, you're right. Do you want to write an entry?" And that was hugely exciting. So for me, continuity buff or whatever, to go through a book and find all the points of continuity and so on. So I wrote that really quickly. I was sufficiently excited, I think, that I just sat down with the computer next to me and read the book and was writing it at the time. And thus began a beautiful friendship. And then a few years later, when Robert was asked to write the book that eventually morphed into Bookworm, he said, yes, but I don't think I can do it on my own. So I've got this bloke I know in England. I had never met at that point. We've only met 3 times. We've been friends for 15 years or so. And would I like to do it with him? And yes, I would. We started, this was a long time ago, and the book went through lots of metamorphoses. I was very lucky to have Robert there as an editor who sat there and going, this 15-line sentence, can we have a bit of a think about this sentence? And so I've learned that trade through practice, through having Robert sit there and go, not sure this is working. Stop it. You're creating yet another long list of things people don't want to read about. and by reading actively rather than passively. I mean, I think you always have to read a book, and if you're reading Agatha Christie, it's your duty as a reader to try and be ahead of the story and work out who the murderer was. But actually reading beyond that and going, why is he using that language? How is he doing that? And then I found myself, little post-it notes writing things like furiously, because for whatever reason, something I was thinking about yesterday, I need to get that adverb in there. And I don't know whether that's what writers do. I don't know whether I'm a writer, really. I just know I've written.
If you you're a writer. Yeah,
well, yeah. I mean, the book's gone down well, so I'm pleased with that. It's Bookworm, by the way, Robert Smith and Anthony Wilson, available from ATB Publishing. Shameless plug.
As well you should. Anyone who's written a book or, recorded an album or anything like that, as far as I'm concerned, should plug away, because that's no small thing. So it just all came together.
It all came together, yeah. And, in the process, I've made a very good friend, and I'm sort of within a slightly different community. I was never involved in Doctor Who fandom. I'm still not hugely, but I've now met some of them, chatted to some of them, and so forth. I'm not sociable, I think, in that sense, particularly. I'm a bit of an ivory tower kind of creator, for want of a better word, if that makes sense. I work with Robert, but I don't do conventions, anything like that.
Oh, I was just going to ask if you've ever done any of them.
No, my brother has, but not me.
Your brother has?
It does conventions. He's been to conventions, yeah.
Okay.
The same Star Trek, Doctor Who, all that kind of stuff. Children of the 80s and 90s. That's
yeah, I hear that. So I'm just curious, since you ended up becoming a writer inadvertently, accidentally through Doctor Who, is there any other thing that particular show or any other has led you to in your actual life?
Not really, no. I was thinking about this. I find the process of writing very, very difficult, and very, very time consuming, and very, very frustrating. I read, and have you come across Brandon Sanderson?
No.
Okay, American fantasy writer from Utah. Excellent stuff. And he releases incredible numbers of books. And he was talking today about, on his blog, I was reading it just before I contacted you, talking about how there are basically 2 types of writers: the ones who think what they're writing is good while they're writing it and then thinks it's dreadful afterwards. And the ones who think it's dreadful while they're writing it and then are pleasantly surprised when they reread it.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, it feels right. I'm definitely the first type. I'm someone who thinks, this is great. I'm really enjoying this. And I'll look at it and think, this is awful. And then I tweak and change and alter, which I think is part of the process. I think you need to do that.
Absolutely.
Anyone who can go, I wrote this fully formed and it was perfect,
is lying.
Or once again, Mozart. although the bit in Amadeus where Salieri looks at his scores and goes, there are no mistakes in them, that's a complete lie. There are loads of mistakes in them when he's changed and scribbled out and altered and so forth. So even Mozart struggled. I sound like I worship Mozart. I really don't.
Well, if you did, I mean, there are worse people you could worship, I think.
This is true.
In terms of talent. So then how is it that you I mean, I know you said accidentally, but I know you teach in a school.
Yeah.
And you do musical theater. And I think you've said that some of the music you've written is for your work in the school, or am I misremembering that?
I've written stuff for the school. I also run a church choir. In fact, I've run church choir since I was 14. And I've wrote and have written a lot of music for that over the years. Most of it in a wild flurry towards the end of my teens and my early 20s. So yeah, I kind of do what's necessary, if that makes sense. I used to write music because I wanted to, or this sounds like a strange thing, but I suspect it might be more common, to prove that I could.
Okay.
So it must be when I was at university, I thought, right, I'm going to write a Requiem Mass to prove that I can.
Mm-hmm.
And about 10 years later, using a combination of sort of poppy songs I'd written, again in my late teens and early 20s, and then some new ones, I thought, right, I'm going to write an album to prove that I can.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done both of those things sort of off my own bat, but pretty much everything else I've written has been for purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a need. Someone said, we need incidental music for this play. Can you write it? Oh, we're doing The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. There are songs in it. Can you set the words to music? So I've done that, and I've enjoyed that, and it's been good. And most recently, I've written the music for successively both of my daughters' christenings.
Oh, wow.
So they both have an anthem each.
That's cool. Not everybody can say that.
Well, you do, I suppose, what you can do. There are other things I might have loved to do that I wouldn't have been able to do, but I'm pleased with it. I'm pleased with being able to do that they've got, and they're recorded, so they'll be able to go back to them and go, Dad did that.
Mm-hmm.
And that matters.
So how does it feel to have written a book versus hearing a piece of music that you've written performed for the first time?
Oh, well, there's a weird. I don't know. I think writing the book is probably more satisfying, just because by the time you've done it, it's done.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas all the music I do, I play for and conduct and sing in. So I'm not really thinking about, oh, isn't this sounding good? Or, oh, I wish I'd changed that or anything. I'm kind of going, right, no, tenors, come in, please. So I'm more sort of panicked about the actual process, whereas the lag time from when you go, right, this book is finished, to, aha, this book has been published, is huge.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you're very sort of in the moment with the music. So with the choral stuff, I'm doing it live, in the church as it happens. The piece I wrote for my second daughter May's christening, which was a couple of weeks ago, the vicar came up afterwards and said, "You looked shattered after that." Absolutely, I was. The album's a different thing, because that, in a way, I sat there for 3 weeks and built all the backing tracks. I did the whole thing with backing tracks. Turned up with a recording of the backing tracks to a recording studio for 6 hours and recorded them all straight, and it was done. And a little bit like the book, it was then done. And the total number of people who've listened to that album is about 4. So, I'm one of them and I enjoy it, so that's all right.
Well, it is important that, that you value it, even if someone else doesn't.
It's not that someone else doesn't, it's that I don't share it.
Okay.
I did with a few people. Someone said, "Oh, this is very depressing," and they're right. No, they're absolutely right. To paraphrase someone I heard, I think it was Martin Joseph I heard in concert. He said, and it's true of him and it's true of me, that we both make Leonard Cohen sound like Julie Andrews. So, yeah, it is depressing, and that's fine, and that's fine. But it was very much writing about Doctor Who. It's writing about Doctor Who. Setting Latin or Greek words or even English words for a religious service is performing that task.
Mm-hmm.
Writing all the lyrics and the music of an album is almost by definition at least semi-autobiographical.
That makes sense.
And not all of it. One of the songs was about Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time saga. That's not really autobiographical. I don't believe I've ever had my mind taken over by a dark shadow lord. Or if I have, I've never noticed. But some of it is semi-autobiographical. And that makes it much harder to share.
Mm-hmm.
So you choose who you share it with.
Yes.
And once you've made that choice, you get their reaction to it. And that was enough, in a way.
Fair enough.
It was something I wanted to do it. But hey.
Yes. And
I'm not sure quite where to end that conversation. That's where it stopped.
But, I'm thinking about that. And first of all, I should say that I did not mean to imply that, someone came up to you and said, oh, your album is terrible. But there is the notion that, not everybody's going to be your audience. And so, the fact that it's possible that someone will say, I didn't like your book, or I didn't like this, or I didn't like that, doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that it wasn't their thing.
Absolutely. But sorry, I'm interrupting you now.
No, go ahead.
Dependent on your mindset, that can be very, very hard to take.
Yes.
And actually, no one said it was bad, because I chose very carefully the people I gave it to.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all far too polite to say it was bad to me if they thought it was anyway. But the book going out there has been a much, much more interesting experience. The reviews have been very positive, but even when you get the tiny negatives, you've got to have a mindset that can go, okay, that's fine. You didn't like that, or you disagreed with that, or whatever, which is fine. And there were some errors in the book that have been picked up in reviews. So they are going into volume 2 as a let us laugh at ourselves method of, we made these errors. We shouldn't have done. Hey ho. Which is one way to deal with it.
Right.
But again, harder if it's you're putting on the page.
Yes. Much harder.
So I don't know. It's the battle. Well, the battle I have, I can't speak to anyone else. The battle I have is being horrendously self-critical. And so I struggle to like all the things I've done. There are things I'll listen to, and particularly early things I've written that I reread. I just think, God, I wouldn't do that now, which is great because it means I've got better.
Right.
I've improved. And I can recognize that, and I could change and so forth. But at the same time, it's hard to have someone else point it out if you're already of the mindset to be self-critical.
Yes.
You want other people to go, actually, I like this, when you're feeling, I'm not so sure. The moment someone else concurs with your I'm not so sure, you can spiral down if you are not of a hard enough, strong enough mindset. And sometimes I am of a hard enough, strong enough mindset, and sometimes I'm really not.
Yeah, I think that's completely normal, but I'm glad that you're bringing it up because, on the one hand, it's super easy for me to sit here and say it doesn't necessarily mean your work is bad. It's just not your audience. It's easy for me to say that. It's easy for me to forget it. It's much easier said than done. And I think, there's an impulse, and I wonder sometimes how much of it is just human nature and how much of it is conditioned into us to instinctively doubt everything that we do and be so critical of our own work. I know when I finished my MFA program, I was one of the few people that I knew in my program who still liked my book. I was really, really shocked by the number of people who said, I hate this book. The only thing this book is good for is to get me a diploma. I really hate this book. I'm never looking at it again once I finish and all that. And I was like, my book's not perfect, but I really like my book. I like my characters. I still want to do work on it, but I don't hate it. And I was really, really struck by that to the point where I started to wonder if there was something wrong with me because I still liked my book. So, it's one of those weird things. Everybody hears it differently, but sometimes I think it's sort of like when you see a photo of yourself, everybody says, oh Lord, this is a terrible photo. I hate this photo. This is horrible. Burn it, and sometimes I think, is it really that bad? Or have we just all heard that so many times that it's become a part of us regardless of what we might actually think? Maybe we kind of lose track.
I think that's interesting. I think there's possibly a couple of things going on there. Knowing nothing about your MFA program or anything like that, I think some people perhaps do the book to get through the diploma, and possibly some people do the book because they care about the book they're writing. So there's sort of differences of the way you're coming towards it in the first place. But I don't know. There are people out there, and I envy them in many ways, who are able to go, this will do. 90% of people are like it, it's fine. And I think it's really hard to be a perfectionist.
Yes.
And I've had to kind of learn not to be, in a way. And I remember, I'm tangenting all over the place.
That's okay.
A friend of mine a long time ago was doing teacher training. And she had to give it up because she was a perfectionist, because her lesson plans would say, and then the children will do this.
Oh.
And they didn't.
No.
and she couldn't roll with it. I mean, I think, valid reflection on a lesson afterwards is possibly, well, that was awful. I will never do that again. And that's all the reflection you need to do. But if you're a perfectionist within teaching, that's almost impossible. But on the grounds that teaching is, 6 or 7 hours a day, and then you're on to the next day and the next day.
Right.
You can lose the perfectionism in that aspect, but you don't lose it in others. And the problem with perfectionism is nothing is perfect.
Exactly. And there's also the perfectionism of, if I can't make it perfect, I'm not going to bother.
Yeah, that's very easy to fall into.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I know exactly what you're talking about with teaching. I used to teach with a guy who was, I don't know if it's more accurate to say that he was a perfectionist, or more accurate to say that he had a touch of OCD. But he was the kind of guy who I would teach in his room sometimes, and I was always afraid that I would leave the stapler slightly misaligned on the desk.
Right.
And he had the same kind of thing. I mean, he would have a set of directions that the kids had to follow step by step by step, and would be, upset with them if, instead of going to the menu that said file save, they would just hit the little disk icon because they knew that it did the same thing.
Right.
Or if the internet went down and it flummoxed all of his plans for the day, he just couldn't function. So, and I was just like, okay, so you make up something else. But then I'm a much more seat of my pants kind of person with things like that. So that didn't bother me as much.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you definitely, I mean, the idea that, and then the children will do this.
Yeah.
I think you would find out in a hurry that, in Fantasyland, the children will do this, but in the real world,
I'm not even certain they will in Fantasyland, to be honest. One of my maxims of teaching is, when you have explained the thing 15 times over from every possible direction, so there is no possibility that any child has even vaguely misunderstood, at least 3 children in that room have no idea what you're talking about.
Yes. And there will be at least 3 more ways that you'll have to think of to explain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. So you went from music into teaching, or were they sort of the same process?
No, not at all. I had no idea what I was going to do when I finished my degree, and my tutor said, "Oh, there's a school down the road looking for a teacher. Do you want to do it?" And I said, essentially, I'll give it a go. I don't know much about it, but I have been taught. It's the worst thing about teaching. Everyone's been taught, so everyone thinks they know what should be happening. And quite rightly, having got a certain distance out of the process, the school turned around and said, "Are you a qualified teacher?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Ah." So quite rightly at that point, the school went, "We don't think we can do this." And they were right to make that call. And I was hugely disappointed. So I thought, okay, maybe this is what I should be doing. So I signed myself up for a teacher training program with about 4 days to go before it started. And ended up initially teaching music in secondary schools and eventually transitioning to primary, which is where I probably should always have found my niche.
Fair enough. So is there a particular reason that you prefer primary over secondary?
I think actually it's the style of the way it's taught more than anything else. I enjoyed a lot of the secondary teaching. I lost a lot of faith in the United Kingdom secondary school music curriculum, which required things that I don't think were helpful. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. But primary, I become a teacher of everything. Whereas secondary, I was a teacher of music. And there's
okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So you get to have a finger in everything, essentially.
Yeah, you're with your one class for all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you're teaching them maths and literacy and history and sociology and geography and whatever you fancy, philosophy. I try and get as much stuff as I can in there. Interesting, fun things. Whereas secondary, it's subject specific. So I think that's that more than anything, but I did enjoy teaching secondary as well.
Okay. And you've been doing primary for quite a while now, right?
19 years.
That's a good while.
A fair while, yeah.
Yeah, you must like it or you wouldn't be there anymore.
Yeah, I'm lucky with the school I work at as well. I travel quite a long distance to work at the school I work at because it's a school that's good to work at. And
you do several things there.
Yeah. I teach year 6. I run all the music. I'm the deputy head. I'm the school business manager. I run all the data. There we go.
And I want to just hear all that and think, when do you sleep?
The funny thing is, I used to joke, or when I do a show, because I do those in the evening, the little biog of me on the thing I've done this many shows, these children, this adult group, church choir, and etc., etc. And the final line is always, in his spare time, he's deputy head of the primary school. It does begin to feel a little bit ridiculous. It's the curse of being someone who struggles to say no.
Mm-hmm.
And because there is nothing I do that I don't enjoy.
That's such a beautiful and rare thing to be able to say.
It really is. It really is. I've been very, very lucky. But the problem is when you enjoy something, like an alcoholic, you struggle to stop.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think, actually, I'd really like to do that show, or I'd really like to do that, or I love working with these kids, or that adult group's great, or yes, Robert, I'd love to write a book about it. I've never done that before. And you end up going, oh, I've got a lot of things on my list all of a sudden. But it's all good. It's all good.
Well,
you have to be careful. You have to be careful that you don't sacrifice the people closest to you because you're out all the time.
Yes.
And that's been an interesting thing since my children have been born.
I would imagine so.
Making sure that I'm still seeing them and spending time with them and so on. But I do.
Is there any secret to how you've balanced things since then?
Bedtime. Bedtime is the secret. The children, at the moment, go to bed at 7. Most of my rehearsals start at 7:30 or 7:45 or 8 o'clock. And I get up stupidly early to get into school stupidly early to do all the admin stuff I need to do in the mornings and on my admin days. So I can leave at such a time that I can get home and see them and put them to bed before they go to bed. And I spend the bulk of the weekends with them where I can. But bedtime is key to be able to come home and get that gap and have, on a good day, a couple of hours, or on a bad day, 3/4 of an hour, but have that time with them every day still.
Well, that makes perfect sense to me. That's a lovely way to do it.
Yeah, it works. I couldn't do a job where I got in later than bedtime every day because I just wouldn't see them, and I could not do that.
No, and you shouldn't.
No.
Are they old enough that you can do any music with them yet?
Not quite yet. The older one is just over 2.5, and the younger one will be a year in a month.
Oh wow!
So they're both very young, but Elsie sings a lot. She sings songs that she makes up, and I sit there going, "You keep coming back to the root note. You know what you're doing. You've got an instinct for this. It's going to a party, going to a party." It goes round and round, but it keeps coming back to the same place it should do. La 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 la. And you think, yeah, you're coming back to the same note every time. You know how key structure works, and you are 2.5. Well done. But possibly I'm imagining that and just being a proud father and making the whole thing up. Yeah. So that, and I'll play and she'll sing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star and things like that. But I hope they're musical. I suspect they're going to rebel and both become rugby players.
Well,
nothing against rugby. It's just not my world.
Right. You never know, though. You never know what might stick around.
If I have something I want them to do, it's to find something they love and do it. And I don't care what that is, and I will support them 100% of the way. It's music, dance, rugby, cricket, I don't know, garage music, whatever. I can't even pronounce. I always get that wrong. I don't mind what they do, but find something you love, do it, and do it well. Do it properly. If you're going to do something, do it properly. Don't drift.
No, I think that's great. And I think, that's really what kids need, is the permission to go and find their own thing.
Oh, yeah. And adults.
Yes.
I think a lot of adults need to be given permission to go and find their own thing.
We do. Isn't that funny? Because, as a coach, I definitely talk about permission, because it's this thing that I think, you grow up with needing a permission slip to do this, or needing at least here a hall pass to go use the loo during school, or whatever. And suddenly somehow I think we all feel like we have inherent permission to go do math or science, or build something, or do something that many people would call useful. But if it's writing music, writing a book, auditioning for a play, whatever, we feel like, oh, I don't know, am I really allowed to do that? I'm not sure that I am. That's like, that was on so-and-so's list of things that are a waste of time, and therefore I feel like I'm not allowed to do it. And it's funny, when I first heard it put as, somebody might need permission to do this, it struck me so strangely, like, we're not children, but it really is a huge thing with a lot of people. I find myself doing it, and plenty of other people do too.
It is, and it's a funny thing. My brother talks about how one of the best ways to define things is by looking at the opposite of them.
Mm-hmm.
So if no one had permission to write music, write a book, or audition for a play, the world would have no music, no books, right, and no theatre. And then what would be the point of all the maths and the science? I mean, I accept, Robert is doing wonderful things with his maths. You can calculate time zones.
Absolutely.
Can as well. But we need people to write books and write music and perform and do those things. And we need people to love that and want to do that. And we need to say, that's okay. That's a choice. That's as valid a choice as a 9-to-5 job in the city. It might be less secure, and you might have to take some risks while doing it. But it's okay to do. And, like I say, whatever my kids do to the best of my ability, I will support them to do it.
Yes. And you had talked about, when you first started talking about that, I was thinking, like we were saying, they may or may not become musicians.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that we had actually talked about this before right this second, but I really think one of the biggest gifts that my parents gave me was choral music. Because really? I've been singing in choir since I was 4. I just recently sang the Fauré Requiem again.
Oh, I love the Fauré Requiem.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where you forget how great it is, even though you forget exactly how great it is and how much you love it, until you go in and you start doing it again, and it just washes over you, and you go, "Oh, this is so beautiful." But yeah, it's the kind of thing, like, my brother rebelled. My brother will not sing.
Right. Yeah.
He will now sometimes with his kids, but I remember hearing him one time when he didn't realize anyone else was in the house. I heard this voice singing "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," and I remember standing there going, "Who is that? It's really good."
Yeah.
But, he wouldn't sing. He wouldn't sing hymns on Sunday morning. He certainly wasn't going to be in the choir. That was like his rebellion, I think, from the rest of us. Whereas I could have made it my rebellion, but then I would have missed it. So I wasn't going to do that. But yeah, it's such a huge gift to have something like that is so readily available. Granted, depending on where you live, a good choir may or may not be readily available, but at least it's still there. It doesn't always.
It doesn't need to be good. It needs to be the experience of it. And something like the Fauré Requiem, there's any kind of choral music. There's two ways to experience it, and I always find this interesting as well, because there are people who will, spend time hunting down the perfect CD of their best recording of the Fauré Requiem, which is a totally different experience to standing there in the tenor section singing the lines.
Absolutely.
So there's completely two sides you can experience any sort of music. There is the listening to it and the performing it, and they cross over when you're singing "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot" in the choir in the shower. That's crossing over. You're listening and you're moving between them. They're very fluid. I also think I was very lucky. I was exposed to music from a very, very, very young age, and I think that's key. I mean, I played the piano from the age of 4, and so by the time I hit my teenage rebellion, I wanted none of anything of the wicked works of my parents. There was no way I was giving up piano, because I already knew how valuable it was,
right,
and how useful it was. So, while I was busily arguing with my parents left, right, and centre about their decisions and this, that, and the other, I was still sitting there doing my hour-long practice a day, because it mattered to me. It had caught me young enough. Yeah, it mattered to me, and I knew. And again, I was lucky I had supportive parents.
Yes. And in fairness to my brother, I should say, while he doesn't sing, he is that revoltingly talented person who can play anything he picks up. So he was, the first chair trumpet in high school, and he still plays piano. He played pipe organ for a while. He plays guitar a lot now. He plays harmonica, and I'm just sitting there going, one. I don't even have one.
So the music didn't go away. It just got channeled in a different direction.
Right. He's just as fascinated by it as any of the rest of us. Yeah. So it's still there. And with the kids, I think even more so, because they'll come home and, make up songs and all of that kind of stuff like they do. Yeah. But
I'm hugely envious of people who can play the guitar. I've always wanted to. But by the time I was old enough to want to, I was too old, because I could play the piano, to have the patience to go back to the beginning.
Yes.
And learn things that were really, I watched other people in my school year go, oh yeah, just go to the G minor 7 augmented 6. It's like that. And you just think, no, I don't have time. I can only do D. But I'm hugely envious of people who can pick up a guitar and go, it just goes like this. All right, fine. Yeah, all right, you get on with it. Not envious, not resentful at all.
When I have played with the guitar, and I did toy with the idea of buying a ukulele when my nephew was born, just to have something like that to do with him. And I thought, I can't handle 6 strings, because yes, I have enough fingers, but I can't move them all quickly enough, sort of like what you said. And then I was looking at it going, I'm not really sure that having 2 fewer strings is going to make that much of a difference. And I think it is a patience thing. It's like, I can't learn this quickly enough to be able to do something with it. And that just frustrates me. So I'll just go sing with the kid instead. I know how to do that.
Yeah, it works. Funnily enough, we teach ukulele at my school. And it's a funny thing, because the vast majority of them will never go any further, but it's one of the things that we kind of believe in at the school, and is very much my philosophy, is if you teach 45 children something and one of them take it further, you've won.
Yes.
And that really matters. So if that gets one of them to be a guitarist and then eventually, be headlining Glastonbury in 20 years or whatever, because we did that,
I knew that one when.
Absolutely.
5.
Yeah. Which I think is good. It is about exposing children to as many different stimuli as possible to see what gets them. What are they fascinated by? You can see the kids who the maths is like music to them. They look at it and they watch it flow. And that's just beautiful to behold. And then there are others you watch. I've got, 10 and 11-year-old kids in my class who are doing things with language that I envy. And then there's art. I cannot draw. My stick men look like they've been involved in a hideous car accident. And I watch these children draw. And I think, my God, you must take that somewhere. It's so good. And you're 10. And I just, I hope they do. I hope that's where it goes.
Me too. And I'm wondering, since you do get to watch them in so many different contexts, is there anything that teaching that age level has taught you about following your curiosity or your creativity, or just sparking someone's interest in something that might be useful to people who are older than 10?
Yeah, ignore all the rules. Ignore all the rules. There are no rules. There's lots of things going on when you're. I like the phrase "follow your curiosity," but when we are talking about creativity, I suppose it is about curiosity. But creativity is a combination of something you like and something you can do, and then you've got to put the damned work in.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to. That's easier to get children to do, but it's not impossible for adults to do. That's what I discovered through, learning how to write. I still struggle because perfectionist and etc. I look at the writing still to publish and I think, I just changed that phrase slightly. But I got better because I had to do it. And I actively went out in my late 30s, early 40s and went, I need to really look at how people are using language in order to use language. It helped I was a teacher teaching children to write already, because they already had those kind of basics. But if you're going to try and be interesting and entertaining, you need to look at how that works, which is not to say that it is mechanical, because it can't be.
Right.
And it comes, and all of these things, and I think that's the hardest thing about anything of being creative, is some of it comes from knowledge and understanding and learning that if you play a B flat chord, E flat is a chord that is going to fix closer to that than G.
Mm-hmm.
You can do B flat to G, but you have to know how all that works together, and that's the learning. But then there's a part of it that comes out of nowhere, a part of it that you look at it and you think. I look at particularly the Requiem I wrote when I was a teenager, and I think, I don't know where this came from, and I don't think I could do it again.
Yes.
So you've got two things going on. Even as an adult, sometimes you have to do the hard graft, and you also have to trust yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that children are much better placed to do both things. Children are used to doing work. They have homework. That's their life. They go into school to learn stuff. When you're an adult, you don't stop, because obviously you go to new jobs and you have to learn systems and so forth. But you know enough. You're not open, I think, and I'm maybe talking about myself. That's all I can talk about. But you're not necessarily open enough to realise you actually need to do some hard learning here.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, children trust their instincts much more than adults do. Adults second guess themselves all the time. I do it all the time, constantly. I'll write something and think, is that good? Is that bad? Children will just write.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's just genius. It's absolutely brilliant because they're not really thinking hard. They might not be getting all the full stops and capital letters in the right place, but that can come later. That's right. An awful, terrible thing for a teacher to say. Don't quote me on that. No, quote me on that, because they're allowed to be creative so long as they then go back and fix the capital letters and full stops. But sometimes they come up with these moments of sheer beauty in their writing because they're not overthinking. So if there are lessons we can take from children into adulthood for being creativity, it's that you've got to be open to learning your craft. You've got to be able to go, I don't know enough about this, I need to work harder. The Brandon Sanderson thing I mentioned earlier, he said you need to trust yourself enough to be bad. Start by writing a bad book and then go through and make it better, rather than stopping writing after chapter 2 because you think you're writing a bad book. The quote, which I loved, was, if you do that, you'll never be any good at endings. And I thought that was a really interesting way of putting it.
It is, but he's absolutely right. I mean, and that first draft is going to be bad.
Yeah.
I mean, it may not be like, bad along the lines of this is the worst thing that anyone's ever written and you should never be allowed to pick up a pen and a pencil paper ever again.
I hope no one ever says that to me, although someone came close. I'll tell you about that in a moment.
But it's not going to be as good as it's going to get. It is by definition the worst it will be when it's a first draft because it's got nowhere to go but up. Yeah. And as to that sort of review, I have to say when I've encountered my first bad reviews of my book, which I was not prepared for, you think that you'll be prepared, you're not. There were two things that happened. One, a friend of mine sent me an article on the web that was basically a collection of bad reviews of books that are really considered to be fabulous books now. I don't remember what all was on it, except I do know that the New York Times panned The Handmaid's Tale. And when I read...
It's a terrible book. Oh my God. Yes.
When I read that review, I thought, okay, if this is what they said about Margaret Atwood, I can deal. But the other thing was that I had been emailing one of my grad school advisors, who is quite the prolific author in her own right, Rachel Pollack, and we had bonded in grad school because of Doctor Who. So we are always
Doctor Who's always there, isn't it?
Always there. We always email back and forth after new episodes and things like that. So we have an ongoing conversation, even though it's been 10 years since I finished. And I mentioned this to her, and she wrote back and she said that I don't remember which thing it was that she wrote. She may or may not even have told me, but she said someone declared it the very worst thing that had ever been written in the universe. And that at first she looked at it and she thought, wow, that must really be bad. But she mentioned in the email that she wished she still had a copy of it because, okay, I've hit the worst in the universe ever. There's nowhere else for me to go but up.
Absolutely.
So, yes. And I thought, well, that's great. That's the perfect way to look at that. You can't get any worse because this is the worst it's ever been in the history of time. So keep going because you have to get better.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no, the only way, as they say, is up.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, so it's the two things, I suppose, are the work and trusting your own instincts. And your own instincts will lead you astray and they will get you wrong. Mm-hmm. And at that point, you do the work again.
And you learn from what went wrong.
And you learn from what went wrong. And the two things pieced together. Like I say, I was also very fortunate to have Robert, who is the nicest critic I ever
I can imagine that.
He's very much, this isn't quite working, or he'll do it in a jokey way. And he'll suggest solutions. Mm-hmm. He won't just say this isn't working, go away. And I do a run through all the books he edits. I tend to do a run through those as well. And again, I try and take the same approach. I don't think this is working, but here is how I think it can be fixed. Mm-hmm. Which is a good way to be, and I hope that comes across in the way I do it. I briefly mentioned I showed a chunk of my Requiem back when I was a very young. I think I was a very young 18-year-old, even for being 18. I was very young for 18. To a composition tutor at my university, whose name I shall not mention to protect the guilty. And he said, and bear in mind I am now 45 years old, and I can remember it verbatim, he said, yes, well, all of us can set pretentious lyrics to derivative music.
Oh.
And so nearly 30 years down the line, I can quote him. And that nearly derailed me completely.
Absolutely. It's amazing that it didn't.
Yeah, at 18. Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe when you're in your mid-20s, you have a little bit more. And nowadays you have the internet and people to send you, look at this review of The Handmaid's Tale.
Yes.
And things like that. At that point, I was quite derailed. Fortunately, I basically went back to my main tutor and said, I don't want any more composition lessons, please. If I'm going to write music, I'm going to do it on my own terms and in my own way. And I did keep that bit in as part of the Requiem, and the people who performed it and the people who listened to it did like it. So, pretentious and derivative as it was, it still went down okay.
How was that declaration received by your main tutor?
When I said I'm not going to have any more composition lessons? He nodded and smiled. I think he knew. My main tutor was great. He was a man with his feet very firmly on the ground. He knew who everyone was. He knew who I was. He knew who the other people in the department were. He just went, yeah, okay, I can do that.
Oh, I'm so glad. But you're reminding me, I think so many people get derailed because they go out and they write something, they create something, and they're so excited about it that they just want to show it to everyone. And they don't think about who they're showing it to. It's like what you said before about, I chose very carefully who listened to this album that I made. And there's something so important about that, especially at the very beginning of that process, because if you have, the first 5 pages of something that you've just written, and you can't stop thinking about it. You want to write more, but you're so excited you have to have somebody else listen to it. And you don't choose that person really, really carefully.
Yeah.
Anything they say can stop you in your tracks. I've told people, at that stage, what you have is made of gossamer and moon dust, and there's barely anything holding it together. Once you get to the point where, you have 100 pages or something that resembles something close to a finished work, not necessarily finished, but enough of it that you know what it is and you feel secure about it. And you're like, this I feel really, really good about. Then you still should probably be careful, but I don't think you have to be as careful, because I don't think you'll be derailed as easily as you are in that very beginning stage. But you still, don't just walk up to some random stranger on the street, because they're first of all going to look at you like, hello, crazy person. Why do you want me to listen?
Why are you handing me a manuscript?
Yeah, exactly. But still, you want to pick the person who can look at it and see the potential in it, even if it's not perfect, and know how to encourage you, rather than saying something like that particular person said to you, which makes you want to, go home and dig yourself a hole, bury yourself in it, and never come out again.
Yeah. I think choosing the first person or the first people is very important and very difficult, because this is going to sound like a ridiculous thing now. I'm going to say it's the halitosis argument.
Okay.
It's the what your best friend needs to tell you argument. Someone who can very nicely say, there is a problem and here is how I can help you fix it. Or give you the encouragement you need whilst pointing out the flaws. You can't have someone who's going to say, oh yes, it's absolutely brilliant, when it's not.
Right.
And you can't have someone who's going to say it's absolutely dreadful when it's not.
Right.
You need an honest friend. The funny thing is, with the exception of writing the Doctor Who book with Robert, because I was writing the Doctor Who book with Robert, I have never done that in my entire life. I have only ever presented completely finished works to people. They've never seen works in progress. They've never seen halfway throughs. They've never seen anything. The first anyone heard of any of the songs on my album was when I handed them a CD. It was done and it was finished by that point. So I never did that.
Yeah, well, and after that comment, I can't blame you. I really can't.
Yeah.
But, it also sounds from the way you talk about it, like you knew, I did this for me and I'm happy with it. And that's really the thing that matters. And you might enjoy it too. And I hope you do, but I did this for me. So your opinion isn't going to stop me in no small part because I've already finished it, but it's also not necessarily going to completely throw me off, even if you hate it at this point.
Yeah. And I think that's a huge advantage of deciding that the things you're going to do are the things you're going to do for yourself. And what else happens to them, if anything else happens to them. My girls will probably end up listening to my album, music to slit your wrists to, at some point, and they'll know Daddy did that, and that'll be fine. Or they might not. Or they might sit there thinking, God, what was he on? And that's fine too. I don't mind. I did it for me for the most part. And I think even a lot of published people, published authors, musicians, etc., in the end, they've done it for them in the first instance. It's great that they can make a living out of it. It's fantastic.
Absolutely.
But I think a lot of people do it for them. So I suppose that's my other thought is, if you want to do it, do it. Don't worry about audience. Don't worry about this. Don't worry about that. Just, if you want to do it, do it. When it's finished, then see where you want to be with it.
Yeah, I mean, you are your first audience.
Yeah.
Always.
And you can frequently be your most critical.
Yes. Yes.
Well, my second most critical. I met my most critical at university. But hey, let's enough with that story. We're done with that now.
I think, though, when you're aware that you're frequently your most critical audience, that gives you enough perspective so that, you can step back from your own self-criticism a little bit to keep yourself going too.
I think that's probably true. I think it also makes the work better. I think you sit there and go, yeah, this isn't working. This isn't working. I know this isn't working. For me, in all things, be it, words or music, structure is the key to me. Yes, it matters that you get the right turn of phrase. It matters that you have the right chord here. But in the end, you need to step back, and the structure of the whole needs to hang together. And that's really important. And that's where I really, really, really self-criticize. I sit there, no, that doesn't go to there. But you need to go somewhere else. You need to go somewhere else. This is too long. You need to cut something. That's one of the hardest things in the world. This verse, this paragraph you love, you need to delete it. Yes,
it's Faulkner's Kill Your Little Darlings.
It really is Kill Your Little Darlings, yeah. And that's hard. I learned that. I did a master's in composition for film and television, which I've not done much with. But there were 2 essays that I had to write on vast subjects, which were only 2,000 words. And that's when I discovered how to write essays, in that I would write 4,000 words and then brutally cut them to pieces. And that's the purpose Robert serves me nowadays, because now I write 4,000 words and he brutally cuts them down. But he does it in a terribly nice way.
Yeah.
And I'm trying really hard to apply it myself for volume 2, so we'll see how that's going.
We'll see. But I also, to your point about structure, I know there certainly have been times when a piece of writing has not come together, and I've realized that it's because the structure isn't right. And once I figure out the structure, it'll all happen almost as if by magic. But until then, it's like you're trying to build one house with plans for another, and you haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And often, Terry Pratchett fascinated me in this, because he wrote his books in the wrong order. So he didn't start at the beginning and go through them. And this is fiction, so you feel the need that the plot develops in order. He'd go, right, this scene is scene 69. I'm going to write that scene now. Now I'm going to write scene 34. Now I'm going to write scene 73. And he had no notes, as far as I knew. He just did it.
Oof. To do that without notes. Wow.
Yeah. I may be wrong on that. I don't know enough about how he worked, but as I understood it, he had the whole structure in his head before he started. He had the whole thing, and it just he'd just go and sort, to the point that, he was still writing books when he was suffering very severely from Alzheimer's.
Yes. He
couldn't tie his own shoelaces, and yet he could hold the plot and language of a book together in his head. And I just think that is astonishing. And I bow down to. And I think the man was wonderful anyway, but to be able to do that, to be able to achieve that was just astonishing.
And I mean, I'm an unrepentant pantser when it comes to writing. So if I outline, I won't write the book because I already know what happens. But even so, the structure comes in terms of, now what do I do with this giant chunk of text that I have, and how do I make it work? And and it's not just, oh, look, on page 52, I said the car was red and that this person was involved in this piece of plot that then somehow morphed into this other thing by page 87, and I have to fix that. But it's also just, going through it and just saying what needs to be trimmed and how is this working, and all of that. You're basically reverse engineering it then. Absolutely.
And the reverse engineering is incredibly powerful, because that's the way you get payoff in terms of story, whatever you're doing. Reverse engineering, going back in, going, right, I'm now setting this up to pay off later. It's fantastic. But the best example, if you come across The Memory Palace. So this is going really chatty all of a sudden. Is that all right?
That's fine.
Right. The Memory Palace is a series of short stories about American history by a guy called Nate DeMeo. It's another podcast. They're about 10, 15 minutes long. But he did one about an Egyptian temple that had been literally picked up and lifted to a museum in New York. literally piece by piece.
Been there. Yep.
You've been there. Yeah?
Yep.
And the temple was sacred to, I think, god twins who had fallen into a lake and become gods by drowning or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And he drops that in right at the beginning. And right at the end, he talks about all the tourists walking around it and how parents watch their toddlers carefully lest they fall into the water and are deified. And that I nearly cried because the structure to get to that line, the way it fell together, I just thought this is just magnificent storytelling. And that's all about the structure.
Yes.
And I heartily recommend that. And I have nothing to do with Nate DeMeo and own no shares in it whatsoever. It's a fabulous podcast.
I will check it out.
I'll tell you what it did ruin for me. It ruined The Greatest Showman.
Oh,
because
okay.
He talks quite a lot about Phineas T. Barnum, and Phineas T. Barnum was a... Are you a family-friendly podcast? I'm assuming you are. If you weren't a family-friendly podcast, I would give you a word at this point that describes precisely what I think of Phineas T. Barnum. And The Greatest Show does not depict his story in anything approaching an accurate manner.
A little whitewashing, eh?
Oh, it goes far further than whitewashing.
Okay.
But I'll let you find out for yourself. But anyone out there who's watched The Greatest Showman, go and Wikipedia Phineas T. Barnum.
Okay.
To be fair, though, he was a good creator and he was good at structure.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing. It's everybody has their talents, even if they're flawed.
Yeah, and we're all flawed.
Using your powers for good is
using your powers for good. Yes. We try.
We do.
I'm gonna have that on my tombstone, I think. Tried.
I tried. Well, I know that it's getting late-ish over there, but this has been a great conversation. I've really, really enjoyed it, and I hope you did.
Absolutely, me too. Like I said, it's been very rambly and very all over the place. So, cut it to pieces, do whatever you want to it.
Oh, no.
It's great. Make it make more sense if you like. But
it's great the way it is.
Well, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you very much for inviting me.
That's our show. My thanks to Anthony Wilson and to you for joining us. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review, and share this episode with a friend. You can find show notes, the 6 creative beliefs that are screwing you up, and more at fycuriosity.com. I'd also love for you to join the conversation on Instagram. You'll find me at fycuriosity. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners. See you next time.